Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today. On today's technique, we're going to look closely at watercoloring with the Prima oil pastels. I've used these many times in different videos, and I'm just going to use it in another way. And we're going to use this Prima stamp and the Ranger Distress watercolor paper. You can get this in the boutique. I'll make sure to put the link down below. And since I'm stamping on the watercolor paper, I'm going to use my little mini Misty to make sure I get a nice crisp black line. So we're just going to pre-treat our paper because we are going to use some clear embossing powder once we ink up the stamp and stamp it a few times. Now this is a stamp from the Prima Wild and Free collection. And we're just going to ink up the heart with the VersaFine Black Onyx ink. And like I said, I think it winds up, I stamped this one 3 times. It's the first time I used this stamp, so it does take a little bit extra because I didn't like pre-treat the stamp before I started. I just inked it up. So sometimes it takes multiple stamps to get it kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Conditioned, so that way it stamps smoothly. Because when we do our second heart, it doesn't take as many to get a clear stamp. So once I do that, I'm just going to take the clear embossing powder and I'm going to pour it over top of the heart, so that way the wet ink, because of it being a pigment ink, the embossing powder is going to stick to it. I don't have to heat it right away, but I at least want to get the powder on, so that way, you know, the ink doesn't dry and then it won't stick. And I'm just making sure that the second heart is going to stamp and not stamp on top of the other. So we're going to ink that up. And like I said, on this one, instead of it taking 3 times, I think I only do it twice. So ink it up, stamp, and then we'll pour the embossing powder on top of this one, just like we did the last one. And once that is coated, we're going to eventually heat it up, but I'm just making sure to get the embossing powder into the container so that way I don't spill it, because we all know embossing powder can be a pain if you knock it over. Alright, so we're just going to set this to the side. I'm going to get the heating tool, which you should heat it up before you bring it over to your paper, to your project. And this just helps the melting and having it be less of a warping on your paper, to heat up the tool first, so that way it melts right away. Alright, and once we get that melted, then we're going to do the watercoloring. Now, if you have issues with coloring, I kind of suggest doing the embossing, only because sometimes what it does is it creates like little wells, and it's easier for you to keep the paint in where you want it to go, and less likely to have a lot of overlapping or bleeding if you're not used to doing watercoloring. So with the palette, you're going to color onto your color right onto the palette. And all I do is I wet up my brush, make sure, you know, it has enough liquid in it to pull up the color, and then you go right to the heart. And with all these little squares, what I do is I try to do one of the blocks with high intense, like with the color straight from the palette, and then I do 2 or 3 with the color that's remaining on the brush to get different shadings. So some might be, you know, a nice light, almost sky blue, and then one's going to be a very, you know, a more dark version of that same color. giving it highlights and lowlights and shadows. And you just go around the picture right there, you know. And what I was showing you on that last little square was, if you want it darker, after you go to some other spots, go back, add some more color. The beautiful thing with watercoloring is that if you start off light, you can keep adding color to get different hues or shading of the same color. So like in some of those thin parts, I'm like, you know, it didn't get as dark as I wanted. So I would just grab some more color and go back over them. And you can make these, like something like this, you could even do it with a whole bunch of different colors, make it like a rainbow. For this particular project, I'm just using the one color. And you can get interest just by using the one color. It's really quite cool. Now, I ran out of color on my palette, right? Say you don't like using the palette. Well, just like I've done in previous videos, you can pick up color right from this oil pastel. It's like a crayon. You just use the tip and, you know, your wet brush, you're going to brush it along the color, the end of the crayon there. And it picks up color, and it goes straight down to the page. You can keep adding color to different blocks to create more dynamics or different, you know, shading. So you can do it either way. If the palette isn't working for you, I would just grab the crayon and take the color right off of there. You can do that until you get used to pulling it from the palette itself. And I just think of the palette basically like doing a watercolor, whether it be the pan style, which I'm going to bring my gold over and add some water so that can get ready, because I want to use some of that in on this particular heart. So what I'm going to do is the same exact thing we did with the blue, right? We're going to take as much as the pigment that's on the brush and do as many squares as we can, so that way it just keeps getting lighter and lighter. So I start out with a much darker pink, and then the next square maybe a little bit lighter. But I knew on this particular heart I wanted to show you what doing the gold highlight would do or look like, you know, for what we're doing here. Just filling in. And I didn't want to go too far with the pink and then not have any of the gold, so I just wiped my brush off a little bit right there on the palette. And if you feel like you have too much liquid, dab off your brush. You can use like a paper towel or tissue. I just wiped it a little bit on the palette so that way any of the liquid or extra liquid that's on the brush would come off. And then if you think you need more water, then squeeze. Because the whole thing with the water brush and the palette with these oil pastels, this is very forgiving, okay? It's not, it doesn't have to be rocket science. It doesn't have to be like, you know, this famous artist type style, watercoloring, whatever you want to call it. It's literally just have fun. Keep it relaxed and take the pressure off yourselves. So I'm just grabbing some more color. We're going to hit a few more squares with the gold, and then that will be finished, and we'll go back, and everything else that's white I will color in with the pink again. Alright, and that time I did have a lot of gold pigment on my brush, so I did wind up having to get a tissue just to kind of work out the gold that was in my brush. I didn't want to contaminate or mix the two. I want the pink to be pink and the gold to be the accent. And if I wanted to make this more pink, I could just grab more of the direct color, less water, more color, and put that down straight to the paper. If you want it lighter, then you're going to have more water in your brush, and then grab the pigment, the oil pastel, because that'll keep it on the lighter side. And we're just going to continue just finishing up these few blocks over here. And just blending, making sure everything is covered. And then I always like to wipe off my palette right when I'm done. It's just a white piece of paper that's been laminated, but it works so well. And then look at that. Very pretty hearts. All you have to do is cut it out. You can just fussy cut this heart out and put it on the center of a card with a really pretty sentiment, and you're done. And that's all with the oil pastels. See, the great part about the oil pastels is it's basically like the watercolor pans or the tubes of paint. It's just in a crayon form, okay? That's how they've marketed it, you know, produced it in this particular product. But it's very easy to use, okay? And play with it. Just stamp a bunch of flowers or, you know, whatever image it is that you have and play with it. You've got to figure out, how does your water brush work, you know? Is it too much water? Do I need more water? If you don't like the water being in the brush itself, then just get a cup of water and a regular brush. That works too, okay? So thank you guys for joining me. Make sure you hit the like, subscribe, and share button. And at the end of this video, we will have 3 links to the last 3 technique videos that we've done. Alright, you guys, thank you so much and have a great day.